When people rank the worst U.S. presidents, James Buchanan is almost always near the top, and for one big reason. The country quite literally started falling apart on his watch. By the time his presidency was ending, the United States was no longer just divided, it was breaking. Southern states were preparing to leave, and the threat of civil war was no longer hypothetical. It was imminent. And Buchanan's response? He mostly stood still. So the obvious question is, why? Why didn't he act? Why didn't he try harder to stop the crisis, or at least prepare the country for the war that everyone could see coming? Buchanan entered office in 1857 with two clear promises. He would serve just one term, and he would settle the issue of slavery once and for all. He only managed to keep one of those promises. Almost immediately, his presidency was thrown into chaos. Just 2 days after he was sworn in, the Supreme Court delivered its decision in the Dred Scott case. The ruling declared that enslaved people were still property even if they lived in free states, and that Black Americans were not citizens. Buchanan had quietly supported the decision, hoping it would settle the slavery debate for good. It didn't. Instead of calming tensions, it poured fuel on the fire. Anti-slavery voices were outraged, and the country became even more divided. Buchanan's solution had backfired completely. With that plan failing, he leaned into the idea of popular sovereignty, letting new territories decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. On paper, it sounded like compromise. In reality, it only created more conflict, as both sides fought harder to control those decisions. As the years passed, Buchanan seemed to run out of options, or perhaps the will to act. He largely waited out his presidency while tensions escalated. Meanwhile, his own Democratic Party split into factions over slavery, opening the door for the Republican candidate, Abraham Lincoln, to rise. But there was a problem. Buchanan was warned that if Lincoln won the presidency, Southern states would likely secede. So what did he do? He asked them, politely, not to. And then, in the same breath, made it clear he wouldn't stop them if they did. When Lincoln won in 1860, the warnings became reality. Secession was no longer a threat, it was happening. Buchanan was urged to act, to reinforce federal authority, maybe even to prepare militarily. He didn't. Part of the reason was the advice he was getting. Influential figures around him, including future Confederate President Jefferson Davis, argued that using force against seceding states would violate their rights. Many members of his cabinet, who had Southern ties, agreed. They pushed the idea that Congress, not the president, should handle the crisis, ideally by passing a constitutional amendment protecting slavery. While Washington debated, the situation spiraled. Some of Buchanan's own officials secretly supported the South, moving weapons and resources in their direction. The government itself was fracturing from the inside. Eventually, Buchanan began to realize how serious things had become. He made late attempts to calm tensions, even proposing limits on federal interference with slavery. But by then, it was too late. States were already leaving the Union. In a final effort, he asked Lincoln to publicly reassure the South that slavery wouldn't be threatened. Lincoln refused. He knew such promises wouldn't be trusted and would only deepen divisions in the North. More importantly, it went against everything he believed in. With no clear path forward, Buchanan stuck to a strategy of avoiding further escalation. He hoped that by not provoking the South, fewer states would leave. They left anyway. By the end of his presidency, multiple states had seceded, the Union was unraveling, and war was all but certain. Buchanan, deeply unpopular and politically isolated, seemed to accept that there was little more he could do, or was willing to do. Within days, he would leave office, and the crisis would become someone else's problem. The next video is even more shocking. Subscribe now so you don't miss it.